Before we begin, Galactic Horrors is now on Patreon. Get daily stories in one place, with no ads and no interruptions. Link is in the description or search Galactic Horrors on Patreon. Now, let's begin the transmission. The Hobson kid wanted to keep his X-ray. He was 16, still in his dirt-caked motocross jersey, and he'd been holding the film up to the ER's overhead lights for the past 10 minutes, tilting it back and forth like it was a baseball card. His left collarbone was snapped clean, a fracture line through the clavicle, and he kept showing it to his father and saying, "Dude, look at that," like he'd accomplished something. "That's hospital property," I told him, clipping the discharge sheet to the clipboard. "And it's digital now anyway, that's just the print." "Can I take a picture of it?" "Knock yourself out, not literally, you've done enough of that tonight." His father signed the discharge forms, while the kid photographed the X-ray with his phone. Ray Costello, my night nurse, handed over the sling instructions and the referral to the orthopedic clinic in Tulsa, 60 miles east, the nearest one. Most things were 60 miles east. Braddock County Hospital served a town of 4,000 and a scattering of farms and ranch properties along the state highway, and we were equipped accordingly, which meant we could handle lacerations, fractures, cardiac events, the occasional stabbing from the bar on Route 9, and not much else. Anything past a Category 3 trauma got stabilized and helicoptered to Tulsa or Oklahoma City. I'd been here 12 years. I knew what we could do and what we couldn't, and I'd made peace with the gap a long time ago. The Hobson kid and his father left through the front entrance at 10:41. I remember the time because I logged it on the chart, then looked at the clock above the intake desk and thought about how 4 hours and 19 minutes stood between me and the end of shift. It was a Tuesday in late October. The waiting room was empty. Danny Murdoch, our night security, sat at the front desk reading something on his phone with his feet up. Upstairs, Earl Loomis, 78, a retired postman who'd fallen off his back porch that afternoon and was being monitored overnight for a possible subdural, was asleep with a magazine on his chest and the bed cranked up at 30 degrees. Carl Adams was the ward nurse covering the second floor, where Loomis's room was the only occupied bed. That was the full roster. 5 patients had become 1, and there was nothing on the board. Ray poured himself coffee from the pot in the break nook behind the nurses' station. "You want me to restock Bay 1? He asked. "We're low on irrigation kits." "Do it in the morning. Let Keating's shift deal with it." "You're a generous man, Dr. Nelson." "I'm a tired man." I dropped onto the stool behind the intake desk and pulled up the inventory screen on the ancient desktop monitor that took 45 seconds to load any page. The system was called MedTrack, and it had been installed during the second Bush administration and never updated. Half the drop-down menus referenced departments we didn't have. The whole building was like that. Functional enough if you knew its specific limitations. Hazardous if you didn't. The backup generator hadn't been load tested since March. The elevator serviced 2 floors and broke down twice a year. I knew which supply closets had what, which corridor lights were wired to which breaker, and which doors in the east wing didn't latch properly because the frames had warped over the decades. This hospital was my workplace, but it was also a building I understood the way a mechanic understands a car he's kept running past its warranty, by memory and habit, not because the manual was any good. The vehicles came at 11:14. I heard them before I saw them. Several heavy engines coming fast on the highway, and then slowing for the hospital entrance. Danny sat up and looked toward the glass front doors. Headlights swept across the waiting room walls. 5 vehicles, black SUVs and a large van, the kind with no rear windows, all pulling into the ambulance bay at the east side of the building. Danny was already on his feet. "That an accident call?" Dispatch didn't ring us. I checked the phone. Its screen was blank. County EMS had been silent. The ER bay doors opened, the big sliding panels where ambulances backed in, and men came through them in a way I had never seen anyone come through those doors before. They were armed, rifle-grade weaponry, body armor, black tactical uniforms with no visible insignia. 6 of them, then 8, spreading through the ER bay and into the intake corridor with a precision that said military training, not law enforcement. Two of them went directly to the front entrance and began threading a heavy chain through the door handles. "Hey, hold on," Danny said. He stepped toward the nearest man and put his hand up, palm out, the way he'd been trained to approach a situation he didn't understand. "You can't—" The nearest man grabbed Danny's raised wrist, cranked it behind his back, and zip-tied his hands to the arm of the waiting room chair in one motion. Danny's protest rose in pitch. The man didn't respond. I was standing behind the intake desk with my hand on the phone when a man in his late 40s walked through the bay doors. He wore the same tactical gear as the others, but carried himself differently, scanning the room, taking inventory. He had a hard-shell credentials case that he opened and held up as he approached me. "Dr. Nelson, I'm Agent Ed Harlan, Department of Homeland Security." The credentials looked real: gold shield, photo ID, holographic seal. "This facility is now under Federal Emergency Medical Authority, effective immediately. I need you to put the phone down." I didn't put it down. "What is this?" A federal transport vehicle was involved in an accident on the highway 9 miles south of here. We have a surviving subject who requires emergency surgery. You're the nearest qualified surgeon. He said it like he was reading an equipment requisition. No inflection. Pure procedure. "We're bringing the subject in now. I need to call my administrator. I need to call County EMS Dispatch. If there's a highway accident, there are protocols. Those protocols are suspended. County has been notified through federal channels and instructed to stand down. Your administrator will be contacted by my office." Harlan looked past me at Ray, who had come out of the break nook and was standing in the corridor holding a coffee mug, like he'd forgotten it was in his hand. "You the nurse?" Ray Costello, registered nurse. He was 52 and had worked ERs in Tulsa before taking the county job. He'd seen bad nights. He was trying to file this one in a category he recognized. "What kind of injuries are we looking at?" "The subject requires surgical extraction of an embedded device from the upper thoracic region, near major vasculature. Dr. Nelson will perform the procedure." "I'm a general surgeon in a county hospital," I said. "If the device is where you say it is, you need a cardiothoracic team, bypass capability, and a blood bank that holds more than 12 units. You need Tulsa." "Tulsa is not an option." "Then Oklahoma City." "Also not an option." Those are the options. If I open a chest beside a major vessel in this building and something goes wrong, I don't have the people or the equipment to recover. Being the closest surgeon doesn't make me qualified for the procedure you're describing. Harlan studied me for a moment, not surprised by anything I'd said. "You completed a trauma fellowship at St. Francis. You performed 2 emergency thoracotomies during your final year, and another here in 2018 after a farm equipment injury. That patient survived transport." I hadn't told him any of that. The farm case was in MedTrack, buried 6 years deep in a system that could barely retrieve last week's lab results. My fellowship record wasn't in this building at all. "You researched me before you came," I said. "We identified the nearest available physician with relevant experience. The subject cannot be moved farther. You are the available option." Behind him, one of the armed men tightened the chain across the entrance while Danny sat twisted against the chair, his hands bound behind him. Harlan understood the difference between proximity and qualification. He knew exactly where the gap in my training was and had brought the procedure anyway. "You're giving me an order," I said. Harlan unholstered his sidearm, a black semi-automatic, and placed it flat on the instrument tray beside the intake desk. The gesture was clear enough. "I need you in your operating room in 5 minutes, Dr. Nelson. Is it on this floor?" I told him where it was. I didn't have a choice that I could see and have it end well for me or for Danny or for Ray. 2 armed men were already stationed at the bay doors. Another was moving toward the stairwell. Through the front entrance glass, I could see more vehicles outside, men taking positions around the building's perimeter. They wheeled the gurney in through the bay doors 2 minutes later. 4 men escorted it. The subject was covered from chin to feet with a dark thermal blanket, military issue, the kind that masks heat signatures. Restraints were visible at the edges, heavy clamps at the wrists, ankles and torso, bolted directly to the gurney frame. A head clamp held the skull fixed. An IV line ran into what appeared to be a modified port on the subject's upper arm, and one of the agents was carrying a drip bag attached to a portable stand. Sedation. Whatever was on that gurney was being kept unconscious. Another agent carried a hard-shell case, graphite-coloured, the size of a briefcase, and set it on the counter beside the OR door. Like the vehicles and weapons, the case belonged to some other kind of operation. Harlan walked me to the OR. Ray followed, because I told him to. Inside, under the surgical lights, Harlan laid out the parameters. The subject had a device. He showed me a grainy image on a portable screen from the case, what looked like a small rectangular object seated deep in the chest, resting against a major vessel that needed to be extracted intact. I was to open, locate, extract, and close. Harlan barred any additional examination or questions about the subject's identity, origin, or condition beyond what the surgery required. "I don't operate on patients without a chart," I said. "No medical history, no allergy profile, there is no chart. This is what you have." He tapped the screen showing the device's location. "Agent Boyd will remain in the room. I'll be at the door. Anything you need, you ask. Anything you see, you do not discuss outside this room. Are we clear?" I looked at the gurney, at the shape under the dark blanket. "What am I operating on?" "You'll prep the surgical site now, Doctor." Agent Boyd, younger than Harlan, broad across the shoulders, sidearm on his thigh, positioned himself against the far wall. Ray began laying out the surgical tray, hands moving through the routine. Scalpel, retractors, hemostats, suction, clamps, suture kit. His face told me he understood this was wrong in every direction, but his training was doing what training does. One task, then the next. I pulled on surgical gloves double-layered from habit. Then I reached for the edge of the thermal blanket and drew it down from the subject's chest. The skin was the colour of wet slate, a deep, mineral darkness that absorbed the light from the surgical fixtures above. The texture was wrong, dense and fine-grained without visible pores, stretched over a rib structure that sat too wide and too flat. The proportions of the torso were subtly off in a way I couldn't name on first look, but my hands knew. 12 years of operating on human bodies, and my hands knew before my brain could articulate it that nothing under this blanket matched. I looked at Harlan standing at the OR door. His expression hadn't changed. "Prep the site," he said. I scrubbed and prepped the way I would for any thoracic procedure, because there was no other way to begin. Betadine solution, applied to the chest with gauze. The solution sat on the surface of that dark skin without absorbing. It beaded up and rolled off like water on waxed metal. I wiped and reapplied. The result was the same. Whatever this tissue was, it didn't take prep solution the way human skin did. Ray positioned the portable imaging screen where I could reference it during the procedure. The device showed clearly a small, dense rectangle, roughly the size and shape of a domino, seated in what the image suggested was the upper thoracic cavity, adjacent to a major vessel. In a human patient, I'd be looking at the aortic arch area. Whether that comparison meant anything here, I didn't know. I made the first incision. The scalpel cut through the outer layer of skin with more resistance than I expected, like cutting through heavy rubber. Then, the blade dropped into softer tissue beneath, and blood welled up into the wound. Dark blood. Darker than venous human blood, almost black, and viscous in a way that looked wrong under the surgical light. I placed a retractor to hold the incision open and reached for suction. The retractor's steel edge began to discolor within seconds. I saw it before I understood it. The polished surface of the retractor, where it touched the wound margin and the pooling blood, was turning brown, then black. The metal was corroding, pitting and roughening as I watched, the way steel looks after weeks of exposure to salt water, except this was happening in real time. "Ray, give me a new retractor." He handed me one. I pulled the first retractor out and looked at it. The working edge was eaten through. Shallow craters in the metal, the finish stripped away, the structural integrity compromised in under a minute of blood contact. I set it on the tray and looked at my gloves. The nitrile on my right hand, where blood had seeped onto the fingers, was thinning. I could see my skin through the material. Double glove me again. Ray pulled fresh gloves over my existing pair. Then he looked at his own hands. He touched the bloody retractor when I passed it back, and stripped his gloves and regloved himself. I watched the discarded nitrile on the tray. A smear of the creature's blood sat on the thumb. The glove material was dissolving around it, curling and splitting apart. I kept working. There was no option that included stopping. I cut deeper through layers of tissue that almost corresponded to what I knew. There were muscle groups, or structures that served the same function as muscle groups, layered in patterns that approximated human anatomy the way a cover version approximates a song. Close enough to follow, wrong enough to confuse. I kept looking for landmarks. The subclavian vessels should have been here. The brachiocephalic trunk should have branched there. Instead, I found vessels that ran in almost the right paths but split at different angles, feeding into organs I had no name for. The blood was the constant problem. Every vessel I nicked, every tissue layer I cut through, released more of it. The suction couldn't keep up, and the suction tip itself was degrading. The plastic tubing held up better than the metal, but the rigid steel nozzle was corroding and would fail within minutes. Ray was cycling instruments in and out, handing me fresh tools as the old ones died. Our surgical inventory was not built for this. Braddock County's OR budget bought replacement instruments once a quarter, and I was burning through scalpel blades at a rate that would exhaust our stock before I reached the device. Something I noticed while working. Blood that pooled in the stainless steel basin and stayed covered. By the instruments I'd laid across the top, or by gauze pads, corroded the steel more slowly than blood in the open wound. The active destruction was worst where the blood was directly exposed to the air. Blood that sat covered or submerged under other blood held its acidity but didn't seem to produce the same rapid surface attack. The observation registered in the back of my mind and stayed there unprocessed. I was too deep in the procedure to think about chemistry. 40 minutes in, I reached the device. I could see it through the retracted tissue. A dark rectangle embedded in a dense, fibrous matrix, with fine structures growing around it and through it. Biological tendrils, fine threads of tissue that had integrated with the device's surface, the way a body grows scar tissue around a foreign implant. Except this looked intentional, organized. The creature's body had incorporated the device. I began dissecting the tissue away from the device's edges, working with a fresh scalpel blade that I knew would last 3, maybe 4 minutes. The work was delicate. The device sat against what I interpreted as the creature's primary arterial vessel, a trunk line as wide as my thumb, running under high pressure. I could see the vessel wall distend with each of the creature's slow, sedated heartbeats. If I nicked that vessel, the spray would be catastrophic. The volume alone was dangerous. The blood made it worse by destroying everything it touched. The creature's right hand twitched. One finger, a contraction of the tendons, pulling the index finger inward against the wrist restraint. Then the middle finger. I looked at the hand and looked at the IV line. The sedation drip was running through tubing that connected to the modified port on the creature's upper arm. The connection point where the tubing met the port was wet. Seeping blood from the port site had been running along the tubing joint for the duration of the surgery. The tubing was thinning. The blood had been dissolving it from the outside. The flow of sedation hadn't stopped completely yet, but the line was compromised, the drip rate dropping as the tubing wall weakened and began to leak. "Harlan, the sedation line is failing." Harlan stepped into the OR from the doorway. He looked at the IV line, then at the creature's hand, which had gone still again. "How long do you need?" "The tubing is dissolving. I need a replacement line, and I need it now, or this patient is going to wake up on my table." "We don't have replacement tubing." Then we're done. I'm closing. The device hasn't been extracted. You're not closing. If this thing wakes up while I'm inside its chest, work faster. I turned back to the wound. The device was 90% free of the surrounding tissue. One more margin to dissect, along the inferior edge where the tendrils were thickest. My scalpel blade was already losing its edge. I cut. The tissue separated. I could see the full outline of the device now, seated in its cradle of fibrous material, pressed against the arterial wall. I reached in with forceps to grip the device. The forceps' jaw surfaces were corroded and couldn't grip cleanly. I adjusted, squeezed, felt the device shift in its bed. The creature's torso strained against the restraints. The whole body, contracting at once, a surge of force that rocked the gurney on its wheels. The head clamp. Its locking pin had been in contact with blood that had seeped under the contact points during the surgery. Snapped. The pin sheared through corroded metal, and the creature's head came free. It opened its eyes. I had my hands inside its chest. My right hand held the forceps gripping the device. My left hand held a retractor bracing the wound open. I was looking down into the thoracic cavity when the creature's eyes opened and its head turned, and it looked at me from 18 inches away. The eyes were dark, set deep, with pupils that contracted against the surgical light. The face had structure I couldn't pass. No expression I could read, but the eyes tracked me with focus and recognition. It knew I was there. It knew what I was doing. The wrist restraints failed next. The bolts that held the clamps to the gurney frame had been sitting in pooled blood for the better part of an hour. The corrosion had weakened them past their structural limit. The creature pulled, the bolts sheared, and both arms came free at the same time. It heaved again, tearing the torso and ankle clamps from the gurney frame. It came off the table. The movement was faster than anything that size and that injured should have been able to produce. It swept my hands out of the wound, forceps and retractor clattering away, and rolled off the gurney onto its feet. The IV stand went over. Instrument trays crashed. Ray stumbled backward into the wall. Agent Boyd raised his sidearm and fired twice. The first round hit the creature's left shoulder. The entry wound sprayed blood, high pressure, arterial force, across the width of the operating room. It hit the overhead surgical light, the anesthesia cart, the wall behind me. It hit Boyd's face and hands. Boyd's scream was immediate and uncontrolled. He dropped his weapon and clawed at his eyes with both hands, the skin of his cheeks already reddening and splitting where the blood had struck. He went to his knees and then onto his side, the sound breaking as he clawed at his face. The creature didn't pause for Boyd. It moved toward the OR door. Harlan was there, weapon up, and he fired, 2 shots that lit the room with muzzle flash. One round hit something, I couldn't see what, and the creature staggered but did not stop. It reached Harlan. What it did was fast. One arm pinned Harlan's gun hand against the doorframe. The other struck him in the chest with a force that folded him inward. I heard the sound his ribs made. Then it threw him, a full extension of its arm that hurled Harlan into the corridor wall. He hit and dropped and did not move again. The damage was visible from where I stood. His torso had changed shape. The blood spray from the gunshot wounds was on everything. The surgical light above the table began to stutter as the acid ate into the electrical connections. One fluorescent tube went dark, then another. The room dimmed in stages, and with each dead tube the creature seemed to move more easily, more smoothly, as if the light itself had been restraining it. The overhead fixtures went dark. The only remaining illumination came from the emergency strip along the baseboards and the glow of the portable imaging screen. In that dim wash, the creature crossed the OR and pushed through the door into the hallway and was gone. I was on the floor. I don't remember going down, whether I was knocked aside during the creature's exit or whether my legs simply gave out. Ray was against the far wall, pressed flat. Boyd was on the ground near the instrument tray, no longer screaming, his hands over his face, his breathing ragged and wet. Harlan was in the corridor, visible through the open door, motionless. And in the air around us, at ankle height and rising, a yellowish-brown haze. The sprayed blood pooled on every surface, was reacting with the open air, oxidizing, producing a low, visible fog that crept along the floor and curled around the legs of the overturned gurney. I looked at my right hand. The skin above my glove line, the bare wrist, 2 inches of exposed forearm where the surgical gown's cuff had ridden up, was burned. A red, wet stripe where blood spray had hit skin. It hurt the way fresh steam hurts, deep and immediate. "We need to move," I said. "Ray, get out of this room." The hallway outside the OR was dark except for the emergency strips, low-wattage LED bars at baseboard height that cast just enough light to see the floor and the walls and not much between them. The gas was already seeping out of the OR behind us, a low tide of brownish haze that followed us into the corridor. Harlan was dead. I checked for a pulse at his neck and found nothing, and the deformity of his chest told me there was nothing to find. Boyd was dying in the OR and I did not go back for him. The gas was filling that room from the floor up, and Boyd was on the floor. I made the decision in the time it took to look from Boyd to the gas and back. That speed should probably bother me. It doesn't. We found Danny Murdoch zip-tied to the waiting room chair near the ER intake desk, 15 yards down the corridor. He'd been yelling. We could hear him as soon as we cleared the OR wing, and when we reached him, he'd wrenched the chair halfway across the room trying to free himself. I cut the ties with surgical scissors from my coat pocket. His wrists were raw. "What the hell is happening?" Danny's face was white. He'd heard the gunshots and the screaming, and he'd been sitting in a chair unable to move. "What was that? What were those?" "The patient got loose. We need to find a way out. Where did they seal the building?" Danny had been watching when the agents secured the perimeter. He told us what he'd seen, speaking fast but clear. He was scared, but he was also a man who'd done 20 years of security work and knew how to report. The ER bay doors, the big ones, had been welded shut from outside. He'd heard the torch and seen sparks through the gap at the bottom. The emergency exit at the east stairwell had steel plates bolted over it. The agents had gone around the full exterior of the building during the first 20 minutes of the lockdown. We tried the main entrance first. Through the glass front doors I could see it, a heavy chain looped through both handles, secured with a padlock the size of my fist. Beyond the doors, the parking lot was full of vehicles I didn't recognize. Black SUVs and a larger truck, arranged in a perimeter formation. Floodlights mounted on 2 of the vehicles threw white light against the hospital's facade. Armed figures moved between the vehicles. A command vehicle with antenna arrays on its roof sat at the far edge of the lot. Nobody out there was coming to open the door. "There are people upstairs," Ray said. "Carl and Mr. Loomis." He was right. Carl Adams was on shift on the 2nd floor, and Earl Loomis was in his room, probably still asleep, unaware that anything had happened. The lockdown and the creature moving below remained unknown to them. We moved toward the west stairwell. The east stairwell's exit was sealed, but the interior stairwell doors were still normal hospital doors. Push-bar fire exits that opened freely from the inside. We were 20 feet from the stairwell when Danny caught his boot on something in the dark. He stumbled forward into the corridor that branched towards the east wing, toward the OR, where the gas had been settling. The haze was calf-high here, pooled thicker along the right wall where the creature's blood had left a trail from the OR door. Danny's arms swung out for balance, and both forearms, he'd pushed his sleeves up during his shift, swept through the gas. The reaction was immediate. Danny made a sound that wasn't a word, a sharp hiss through his teeth, and yanked his arms up. Even in the emergency lighting, I could see his forearms changing. The exposed skin was reddening, then blistering, the surface layer breaking down the way skin breaks down under a chemical spill. White patches appeared, where the burn went deepest. Tissue dying as I watched. Ray and I pulled him back from the corridor junction. I grabbed a saline bag and gauze from a supply cart against the wall. Every hallway in this hospital had one, stocked with basics, and I knew exactly where each one was, and wrapped Danny's forearms in soaked gauze, flushing the burns as best I could. The damage was already done. Full-thickness chemical burns on both arms from mid-forearm to the wrists. The skin was destroyed. Danny kept his jaw shut and didn't scream, but his eyes were wet and his breathing was wrong. "Don't touch the gas," I said, which was obvious and useless, and the only thing I could say. "It eats through tissue on contact. Stay above it. Move fast through it." We took the stairwell. The gas had reached the bottom of the stairs, a thin layer, ankle height, but it thinned as we climbed. On the second-floor landing, the air was clear. We pushed through the fire door into the upper corridor. Carl Adams was standing at the nurse's station with his hands on the counter, staring at the ceiling. He was listening to the noises from below. The gunshots had carried. The crash of the gurney and the equipment trays had carried. Something heavy had been moving through the ground floor for the past several minutes, and the sound of it, a heavy, rhythmic weight shifting across the floor, punctuated by the crack of something being tested, a door or a window frame being struck, was audible through the floor. "Tom, what is going on down there?" Carl was gripping the edge of the counter hard enough to bend his fingertips white. I gave him the facts he needed and kept the details of the surgery to myself. Federal agents. A patient that wasn't human. It was loose. The building was sealed. The gas was toxic, and it was rising. Carl had a radio. Hospital-issue walkie-talkie, the same model we'd been using for a decade, with a limited frequency range. But during the lockdown, the agents had been communicating on a channel that Danny had overheard and noted. Carl tuned to it. I pressed the transmit button. "This is Dr. Tom Nelson, Braddock County Hospital. I'm calling the Federal Perimeter Team. Agent Harlan and Agent Boyd are dead. The subject is loose in the building. There is a toxic gas building up on the ground floor. I have injured civilians and I need immediate extraction." Static. Then a voice using a call sign, Victor 6, instead of a name. "Dr. Nelson, acknowledged. Describe the current position of the subject, if known." "Ground floor. I can hear it moving in the east wing. It's trying to find a way out." "Was extraction of the tracking device completed before the breach?" I looked at Ray. Ray looked at me. "The procedure was interrupted before I could extract it." "Then why are you asking me where it is?" The channel stayed quiet. "You called it a tracking device," I said. "If it's still inside the subject, you should know exactly where the subject is." Another pause, deliberate this time. I could hear someone breathing near Victor 6's microphone. "The device's designation does not describe a capability available to this perimeter team," he said. "Continue reporting any visual or audible contact." "Is it your device?" A pause. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then, "Dr. Nelson, shelter in place on the second floor. Move to an interior room away from exterior walls. Assistance is being coordinated." "Coordinated when?" "I have a man with severe chemical burns and shelter in place. We'll contact you on this channel." The transmission ended mid-sentence on my end. The channel stayed open, but no one was talking on it. I stood in the second-floor corridor holding the radio, looking at Danny, whose wrapped forearms were already seeping fluid through the gauze, and at Ray, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest like he was cold. The voice on the radio had asked about the tracking device before asking about our condition. He had asked about the creature's position, but not about our injuries. He had told us to move away from exterior walls. Below us, through the floor, I heard the creature hit something heavy, the sound of metal bending, then a pause. Then it moved again, testing the next barrier, working its way through the sealed ground floor. We waited. There was nothing else to do yet. So we waited, and the gas rose. An hour passed, maybe longer. I'd stopped trusting my sense of time after the surgery. We'd moved to the nurse's station at the center of the second floor, the farthest point from the stairwells and the ground floor corridors where the haze was thickest. Danny sat in a rolling chair with his wrapped forearms resting on his thighs, his face grey-white under the fluorescent tubes. The burns were weeping through the gauze faster than I could change the dressings. He needed a burn unit, along with IV fluids, wound debridement, and pain management that went beyond the 2 acetaminophen tablets I'd found in the nurse's station drawer. None of it was coming. Ray had gone quiet. He sat against the wall near the supply closet, arms still crossed, watching the stairwell door at the far end of the corridor. The creature had been audible for the first 40 minutes or so. Heavy impacts, the creak of structural metal being tested. But then the sounds had stopped. Either it had found what it was looking for, or it had stopped looking. The air on the second floor had changed. A thin chemical bite sharpened the edges of each breath, faint but unmistakable. The gas was rising through the floor, seeping up through cable conduits and ventilation gaps and the spaces around pipe fittings. The sealed building had no air exchange. Every drop of the creature's blood that had hit a surface downstairs was still oxidizing, still producing gas, and the gas was filling the structure from the bottom up like water in a bathtub. Carl broke first. "Danny needs something stronger than Tylenol," he said, standing up from the counter where he'd been leaning for the past 20 minutes. "There's a Pyxis in the ER pharmacy. Morphine, fentanyl, hydromorphone, all of it's in the lockbox. I have the override code." "The ER is on the ground floor," I said. "The gas is on the ground floor. The pharmacy is at the west end, away from the OR. The gas shouldn't be as bad over there yet. You don't know that. I know that man is sitting there with third-degree chemical burns on both arms, and we're giving him over-the-counter pain relief. The pharmacy is a 2-minute walk." Carl was already moving toward the stairwell. He was 46, a career ward nurse who'd spent 15 years at this hospital before I'd arrived. He knew the layout as well as I did. "I'll be fast. The thing was in the east wing last we heard it. Pharmacy is west." "Carl, sit down." He didn't sit down. He pushed through the stairwell door and the hydraulic closer pulled it shut behind him. And then it was 3 of us at the nurse's station listening to his footsteps descend. The footsteps reached the ground floor. We heard the fire door open below, a distant metallic clap, and then nothing for a long time. 8 minutes. 12. I counted heartbeats for a while and then stopped because the count was making it worse. At roughly the 20-minute mark, a sound came up through the floor. Brief, cut short, and then a heavy impact. Something hitting the linoleum hard enough to send a vibration through the building's frame. Then silence. Danny looked at me. Ray looked at me. I picked up the radio. "This is Nelson. I need the perimeter team to respond. I have another man down. He went to the ground floor and he's not responding. I need you to tell me what your plan is, because the gas is reaching the second floor, and I have people dying in here." Static. 6 seconds. Then Victor 6. Same calm voice. "Dr. Nelson, how far has the gas risen? Is it visible at the second floor window height?" "The haze is still below us, but I can taste it in the air." "Why does that matter?" "If the gas becomes visible from outside the building, the containment timetable will accelerate. Dr. Nelson, I'm going to be direct with you." A pause that sounded considered, like a man choosing which version of a briefing to give. "The containment protocol for this category of breach is 4 hours from confirmed breach. You confirmed the breach at approximately 0000 hours when you first contacted us. We are currently at 1 hour, 42 minutes. At the 4-hour mark, if the subject is not confirmed dead or secured, the building will be sanitized." "Sanitized how?" "Incendiary devices are being positioned on the building's exterior load-bearing points, thermite-based high temperature, designed to achieve full structural collapse and complete combustion of all biological material within the footprint." I looked at Danny. Danny was staring at the radio in my hand. "You're going to burn the building?" "At the 4-hour mark. If the subject is not confirmed neutralized before then. There are civilians in this building. There's a patient on this floor, an old man who fell off his porch. He has nothing to do with any of this. Dr. Nelson, I'd advise you to move to the center of the building, away from exterior walls, and you're not extracting us." Silence. The channel stayed open. Victor 6 did not answer the question because there was no version of the answer that would help him. I set the radio on the counter. Ray was looking at me from across the corridor. He'd heard everything. 2 hours and 18 minutes, Ray said. About that. And they're not coming in. They're staying outside. Danny spoke from the chair. The basement. Tom, listen to me. The basement has the building's main HVAC, the big intake and exhaust ducts that run up through the roof. If the feds sealed the doors and windows, they probably didn't touch the ductwork. Nobody thinks about ductwork. I looked at him. 20 years of walking this building every night. He knew systems I'd never thought about. The exhaust duct is wide enough to fit through, I asked. The main exhaust duct is 24 inches square. Tight, but I've seen the maintenance guys get in there for filter changes. It runs from the utility room in the basement straight up through the roof. There's an access panel on the shaft in the utility room. The utility room. Basement level. Below the ground floor. Below the gas. The lowest point in the sealed building, where the heaviest concentration of gas would have settled. But I was thinking about something else. Something from the surgery. The blood in the steel basin, covered by instruments and gauze. The metal corroded, yes, but slower, much slower than the blood in the open wound, where the air hit it directly. Oxidation produced the gas. The blood reacted with oxygen in the air. Take away the oxygen, and the reaction would slow or stop. The existing gas might lose its potency in an oxygen-depleted environment. I need an extinguisher, I said. Ray looked at me. For what? A test. CO2, not dry chemical. There was one mounted outside Loomis's room. Ray brought it while I took a pair of forceps from the treatment cart. We went as far as the west stairwell door. When I cracked it open, the chemical bite strengthened immediately. A thin brown layer lay over the bottom steps, faint but visible in the light from the landing. I crouched on the landing and lowered the forceps into the haze. The polished tips began to darken. Tiny pits appeared along the jaws, spreading toward the hinge. Close it, Danny said behind us. Tom, close the damn door. 1 second. Ray aimed the extinguisher through the opening and gave the handle a short squeeze. White vapor struck the steps and spread low. The brown haze folded away from it. I held the forceps in the cleared pocket. The discoloration stopped advancing. When the white cloud thinned and ordinary air moved back down the stairwell, the brown vapor began to gather again and a fresh line of black crept across the metal. Ray released the door. The closer sealed it, and the three of us stood looking at the damaged forceps in my hand. The liquid still eats whatever it touches, I said. But concentrated CO2 interrupts whatever the vapor is doing, maybe by cutting off oxygen or diluting the reaction. The effect lasts long enough to move. The first burst had lasted less than a second. I set the extinguisher beside the nurse's station instead of returning it to the wall. There's a Halon fire suppression system in the utility room, I said. It was installed in the 80s for the electrical panels. It's supposed to be decommissioned, but nobody ever removed the canisters. Ray looked at me. Halon doesn't work like CO2. It interrupts the chemical reaction that keeps a fire burning. If the blood is sustaining an oxidative chain reaction, the halon might interrupt it across the whole room. The test tells us the reaction can be stopped. It doesn't tell us exactly why. And if you're wrong, Ray asked, then we walk into the worst concentration in the building and die there. If I'm right, the old system will dump all 3 canisters without metering. Enough halon to impair breathing and coordination if we stay in it. Either way, we get a short window to open the duct and climb. It runs straight up. It opens on the roof. Danny said, "What about the thing down there?" None of us had an answer for that. I went to Earl Loomis's room. He was awake. The noise and the sting in the air had pulled him out of sleep. He was sitting up in bed with the blanket clutched to his chest. A 78-year-old man in a hospital gown who understood that something was very wrong, but not what. "Mr. Loomis, I need you to stay in this room. Close the door. Don't open it for anyone." "Dr. Nelson?" What's happening? I heard something downstairs. I'll explain when I can. Stay here and keep the door shut. There was nothing else I could do for him. If we got out through the roof and the perimeter saw us, maybe the protocol would change. Maybe they'd extract Loomis. Maybe they'd decide a surviving witness on the second floor was worth retrieving. It was the thinnest hope I'd ever operated on, but I'd been operating on thin margins all night. We gathered what we could. The extinguisher we'd tested, and a full one from another wall mount. Wet towels from the bathroom wrapped around our faces. The flashlight from the nurse's station emergency kit. I gave Danny a third towel, soaked, to drape over his arms. His hands couldn't grip well. The burns ran down to his wrists, and the gauze had stiffened with dried serum, but he could still walk, and he could still kick. Ray carried the full extinguisher. I carried the cylinder we'd tested. The west stairwell was worse than the last time we'd come through. The gas was visible from the second-floor landing, a brownish-yellow layer that started at about knee-height on the stairs and thickened as it descended. By the time we reached the midpoint between floors, it was at waist level. The wet towels over our faces helped, but the gas attacked exposed skin, and my eyes were burning before we reached the ground floor. I fired the CO2 extinguisher ahead of us, blasting a cold white stream into the haze. The pressure pushed the corrosive gas aside while the concentrated CO2 suppressed its reaction, carving a temporary corridor of breathable air. The effect lasted 8, maybe 10 seconds before the gas seeped back. I fired again. Another pocket of relief. The pressure behind the stream was already weakening. The ground floor was dark. The emergency strips were the only illumination, thin bars of amber at baseboard height, barely enough to see shapes. The gas sat at mid-thigh, a slow, visible ocean of brownish vapor that moved in sluggish currents when we pushed through it. My eyes watered constantly. The skin on my hands, already burned from the surgery, felt like it was being scrubbed with sandpaper. We moved west, toward the basement stairwell access. The utility room was directly below us, one flight down. Danny was between me and Ray, moving on his own but breathing hard. Every few steps I fired the extinguisher to clear the air ahead. The charge was going fast. The corridor turned toward the west wing, past the pharmacy entrance. I could see the pharmacy door. Open. Carl had made it that far. His body was on the floor just past the doorway, face down, one arm extended toward the Pyxis machine on the far wall. He'd reached it. He'd almost gotten what he came for. The Pyxis screen was lit, the override accepted. One drawer hung open. A morphine kit rested inside, still sealed in plastic, inches beyond Carl's fingertips. The medication cart beside him had one corner folded inward. He had reached the machine. He had died before he could take out the dose. I forced myself past him. Danny saw Carl's body and made a sound low in his throat, and Ray put a hand on Danny's shoulder and pushed him forward. The basement door was 30 feet past the pharmacy, a metal fire door with a push bar, the same as every interior door in the building. I was 10 feet from it when the creature came around the corner of the cross corridor ahead of us. It had been in the west wing, somewhere past the pharmacy, past the supply rooms, testing the exterior walls and the sealed windows, and now it was in the corridor between us and the basement door, and it was looking at us. In the emergency lighting at this distance, maybe 25 feet, I could see its injuries clearly. The left side was torn open from the crash and the gunshot wounds, dark blood still seeping from lacerations along the ribs and shoulder. Every drop that hit the floor would produce more gas. It stood upright, heavy, watching us with those deep-set eyes that handled the dim light better than ours did. It was between us and the only way down. I raised the CO2 extinguisher and aimed at its wounded side. The blast hit the open lacerations along its ribs, a concentrated stream of cold, pressurized gas directly into the exposed tissue. The creature's reaction was immediate and physical. Its body flinched sideways, away from the blast, the injured side pulling back as though the cold, or the pressure, or the oxygen displacement at the wound surface had disrupted something fundamental. It retreated into the cross corridor, shielding its wounded side from the stream. "Get through the door," I said. "Do it now." Danny went first because he was closest. He hit the push bar on the basement door with his hip, and the door swung inward. The stairwell beyond was black, its lower steps drowned in gas pooled at the lowest point of the building. Ray pushed Danny through the doorway, then turned. The creature had recovered. It was coming back around the corner, faster now, and Ray was in the doorway holding the push bar with one hand, looking back at me and looking at the creature and making a calculation that I saw happen on his face in real time. "Get downstairs," he said to me. "I'm right behind you." I went through the door. Ray backed across the threshold after me, holding the door open with his shoulder. He pulled the extinguisher pin with his teeth and fired the remaining charge through the doorway. The blast caught the creature across the chest and wounded side. It stopped hard, one hand striking the wall for balance. Dark blood blew backward from the open ribs in heavy drops that smoked when they hit the floor, but the cold white stream kept the aerosol away from the stairwell. Ray held the blast steady, both hands locked around the cylinder, despite the pressure pushing him backward. For 3 seconds, the creature gave ground. 4. The corridor vanished inside white vapor. Ray looked over his shoulder at me. "Get him down the stairs." The extinguisher coughed. The solid stream broke into pulses. Ray shook the cylinder once as if there might be more charge hiding in it. Nothing came out. He threw the empty canister end over end through the narrowing doorway. It struck the creature's injured shoulder with a hollow metal crack and dropped into the gas. Then he set both palms against the inner face of the fire door and drove it toward the frame, trying to put institutional steel between the creature and the stairwell before it could cross the last 15 feet. The creature came through the dissipating CO2 faster than before. Ray got the door halfway closed. He braced one shoe against the frame and pushed with both hands, every tendon standing out along his wrists. The creature struck the corridor side. The door jumped inward and drove Ray back a foot, but he pushed it toward the frame again. "Keep it moving," he said through his teeth, whether to me or himself I couldn't tell. It struck again. The upper hinge tore partly out of the frame. Ray changed his footing and shoved anyway. The third impact drove the door into him. I saw it through the gap. The creature's arm caught Ray across the chest and drove him into the door frame. The metal frame buckled around his body. Ray's body kept the door from closing, and through the narrowing space I saw the creature's other hand close on his shoulder and pull him back toward the corridor, and the sound that came through the gap was something I will carry for whatever amount of time I have remaining. His hands dragged off the inner face of the door. The hydraulic closer took it. The latch clicked. Danny was on the stairs below me, in the dark, calling my name. I put my back against the basement door and braced it with my weight. The door was metal, interior grade, but the frame was institutional steel and the latch was magnetic. It would hold for a few minutes, maybe less. "Danny, keep going down, I'm coming." The basement stairwell was blind dark. I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through gas so dense it looked like brown water. The haze was shoulder height down here, the worst accumulation in the building. My eyes were streaming. The skin on my face and neck felt raw. Danny was already coughing, his wet towel soaked through and useless. We descended, 14 steps to the basement level. The gas swallowed us from the chin up, and then we were wading through it, the flashlight barely penetrating the haze. I found the utility room door by memory. Second door on the left past the bottom of the stairs, a heavy door with a deadbolt that was never locked because nobody came down here except the maintenance contractor twice a year. Inside, the utility room was a jungle of pipes, conduits, ductwork, and electrical panels. The gas was as thick here as anywhere, but the room was large, and the air still held enough oxygen that we could breathe, painfully. The Halon system was on the east wall, a yellow panel with a manual pull handle, connected to 3 pressurized canisters mounted in a steel rack. The system was supposed to have been decommissioned when the EPA phased out halon production, but removing it would have cost $8,000, and Braddock County didn't have $8,000 for things that weren't broken. I pulled the handle. For a second, nothing happened. Then a hiss, loud, pressurized, building in volume as the old valves opened. Halon discharged from the sealing nozzles, all 3 canisters dumping into the room through a system too old to meter the concentration. I couldn't see the suppressant, but I felt it in my throat and chest. The chemical bite of the brown haze began to ease. The visible gas thinned as the reaction sustaining it faltered. Within 30 seconds, it had dropped from shoulder height to waist height. Within a minute, it had settled to a low, inert layer on the floor, still present but no longer actively corrosive. Breathing was getting harder in a different way. My chest felt tight. A pulse had started behind my eyes, and when Danny turned toward the duct, he overcorrected and struck one shoulder against a pipe. The uncontrolled halon concentration was beginning to impair us. We had minutes before we lost the coordination to climb. The HVAC exhaust duct was in the northeast corner of the utility room, a large rectangular shaft 24 inches wide, running vertically from the floor through the ceiling and up through the full height of the building to a rooftop vent. The access panel was a bolted steel plate at the base of the shaft, 4 feet off the ground. I found a socket wrench on the maintenance workbench and went to work on the bolts. 6 bolts. My right hand, the burned one, could barely close around the wrench handle. I got the first 4 off. The 5th was rusted. I leaned into it with everything I had, and the bolt sheared loose. The 6th bolt stripped. I hit the panel with the heel of my hand, then kicked it. The panel bent inward, popped free, and clanged into the shaft. Inside, the duct was a square metal tunnel running straight up into blackness. Internal bracing ran horizontally every 3 feet, steel L brackets that would serve as footholds barely. "Danny, you're going first. Use your feet on the braces. Don't grab with your hands unless you have to." Danny looked at the shaft, then at me, then at his wrapped, destroyed forearms. He didn't argue. He stepped onto the workbench, swung his legs into the opening, and started climbing. Feet on the braces, back against one wall, pushing himself upward with his legs. His hands trailed uselessly at his sides. I followed. The shaft was tight. My shoulders brushed both walls, and dark, and the air was marginally better than the basement but still tainted with halon. Above me, Danny's boots scraped on the metal braces. Below me, the utility room's dim flashlight glow shrank to a small square of yellow. Then the basement door gave way. I heard it. A heavy impact, the magnetic latch failing, the door slamming open against the concrete wall. The creature was in the basement. I climbed faster. My arms ached. My burned right hand sent a white jolt of pain through my wrist every time I gripped a brace. Above me, Danny was slowing. His legs were doing all the work and his breathing was ragged and wrong. Below me, a sound in the shaft, a metallic scrape, then the groan of the access panel frame taking weight. The creature had found the opening. It was climbing. It climbed faster than us. I could hear it below me, the braces flexing under something heavier than a man, the scrape of that dense slate-dark skin against the duct walls. My flashlight was in my back pocket, useless. I climbed by feel, counting the floors by the seams in the ductwork where it passed through the ceiling of the first floor and into the second floor plenum space. 2 stories. Maybe 28 vertical feet from the utility room to the roof. We'd covered half of it. "Danny, climb faster." "I'm trying." His voice was thin and used up. "Tom, I can't feel my hands." "Use your legs and keep pushing." The creature was close. I could hear its weight on the braces directly below me. If I'd reached down and extended my arm, I would have touched it. The duct groaned around us, the thin metal walls flexing with the combined weight of 3 bodies that the shaft was never built to carry. Danny reached the top. I heard him hit something, the vent cap, the metal housing where the duct terminated at the rooftop. "It's bolted," he said. "Kick it." He kicked. The cap rang like a bell. He kicked again. I heard bolts squeal against metal. A third kick. His legs were the only thing still working, and he used them, and the cap tore free with a grinding shriek and clattered onto the roof outside. Cold air poured down the shaft. Oklahoma night, late October, maybe 45 degrees. It hit my face and I gasped against it. Danny hauled himself up through the opening and rolled onto the roof. I climbed the last 6 feet and pulled myself out. Tar paper under my palms, open sky above, stars. The hospital's flat roof stretched around me, studded with HVAC housings and antenna masts. The parking lot floodlights threw a white glow up from below, painting the underside of a thin cloud layer. I rolled clear of the duct opening and got to my knees. Danny was on his back 3 feet away, chest heaving, arms spread, staring at the sky. The creature came out of the shaft behind me. It emerged fast, one arm over the duct housing lip, then the other, pulling itself up and onto the roof in a single motion. It stood 10 feet from where Danny and I were on the tar paper. Blood was running from its wounds, but up here, in the open air, the gas it produced dispersed immediately into the wind. The creature looked at me, those deep-set eyes, catching the reflected floodlight from below. It was breathing hard. Its injuries were worse than they'd been in the OR. The gunshot wounds had opened further during the climb, and the crash damage along its left side was weeping dark fluid in steady streams. It was exhausted and hurt and free. It looked at Danny. Danny was flat on his back, no threat. It looked past both of us, at the edge of the roof, at the parking lot below, at the tree line beyond the hospital's rear lot where the county road met a stretch of undeveloped land, cottonwoods and scrub brush running along a creek bed into darkness. The roof's edge held its attention. Its route ran past us. The creature moved to the roof's edge, crouched, and dropped. A 2-story fall. I heard the impact, heavy, the sound of something hard hitting asphalt, and then a recovery, a stumbling step, and then it was running. The floodlights caught it for maybe 2 seconds as it crossed the parking lot in long, uneven strides. Shouts erupted from the perimeter, men yelling, vehicle engines starting, the sweep of floodlight beams tracking across the lot. The creature reached the tree line and vanished into the dark, and the brush and the drainage land beyond. They found us on the roof 8 minutes later. 2 agents came up through the interior stairwell and the roof access door that had been bolted from the outside. They put us in separate emergency blankets and brought us down through the building, through the second floor, where Mr. Loomis's door was still closed, where I couldn't tell if he was still inside, and out through a ground floor exit where the steel plates had been unbolted. The gas was still thick on the ground floor. The agents wore respirators. They didn't offer us any. Danny was put in one vehicle. I was put in another. They parked us 50 yards apart at the far end of the lot. My burned hand remained raw and unbandaged. The agents moved on without checking my vitals or breathing. I sat in the back of the tactical vehicle for 40 minutes. Through the rear window, I could see the hospital, still standing, still dark. Armed figures moved around the perimeter. Whatever decision the timetable required, they hadn't made it yet. The creature was loose. The device was still inside it, wherever it was. The protocol might not apply the same way now that the subject had escaped the building. Or it might apply to the building regardless. I didn't know. The man who finally climbed into the vehicle across from me wore civilian clothes, a dark jacket over an open collared shirt. Any credentials stayed out of sight, mid-50s. He had a digital recorder that he placed on the seat between us. Dr. Nelson, I need you to describe the surgical procedure in detail. Begin with the first incision and include everything you observed about the subject's internal anatomy, vascular structures, organ placement, tissue density, the device and its integration with surrounding structures. Take your time. Be as specific as your memory allows. Where's Danny Murdoch? Mr. Murdoch is being taken care of. What does that mean? It means he's in good hands. Dr. Nelson, the surgical debrief is the priority right now. Everything you saw inside that thoracic cavity is information we need. You may be the only person who has observed these structures directly. He said it the way Harlan had given orders. Without urgency, without emotion. A man executing a procedure. The recorder's red indicator was already on. I want to call my family. That's not possible right now. When can I call them? Dr. Nelson, you're going to be transported to a facility where we can conduct a more thorough debrief. This will include anatomical sketches from memory, vascular mapping, and a full description of the device's biological integration. The process will take as long as it takes. He paused. Your absence from Braddock County Hospital and from your community will be accounted for through appropriate channels. A cover story is being prepared. I looked at him. He met my eyes with the expression of a man conducting a routine intake, same expression I'd seen on procurement reps and insurance auditors, men who needed something from you and had all the time in the world to get it. I was a data source. I had information inside my skull that no one else had. And that information was now the property of whatever organization had been transporting that creature down a highway in the middle of the night. The building, I said. Mr. Loomis is still on the second floor. He's 78 years old. He fell off his porch. The building is being handled. That's not an answer. It's the answer that's available. Then here's the information that's available. I leaned forward. I can give you the incision. I can give you the vessels and the organ structures and every place the anatomy stopped matching. But first you put Danny Murdoch in an ambulance with a burn team, and you bring Earl Loomis out of that building. The man looked at my burned hand, then back at me. This isn't a negotiation. Then find another surgeon who has been inside one of them. He picked up a tablet from the seat beside him and turned it so I could see the screen. 4 camera feeds divided the display. On one, agents in respirators were moving through the hospital's upper corridor. Loomis's room number was visible behind them. On another, Danny sat inside a medical transport vehicle while someone cut the soaked dressings from his arms. The third showed the tree line beyond the parking lot under thermal cameras. The fourth was a countdown. 58 minutes remained. Mr. Murdoch is receiving stabilization, he said. The second-floor patient is being assessed. Final disposition of the site depends on operational decisions that are still being made. The sooner your account establishes what the subject can survive and what the device may do, the more options those teams retain. That's the arrangement available to you. He treated Danny and Loomis as leverage, giving me a clock and 2 images I had no way to verify. Every silent second felt like a decision I was making about their bodies. Keep that screen where I can see it, I said. He set the tablet beside the recorder. Loomis's closed door remained in the upper left frame. Danny's hands remained in the lower right, motionless while the dressings came away. He pressed a button on the recorder and waited. I understood that my night at Braddock County Hospital was over. My 12 years there were over. My name would be removed from the duty roster and replaced with whatever story they invented. A family emergency, a breakdown, a sudden relocation. Ray Costello was dead in a doorway with his chest crushed. Carl Adams was dead on the pharmacy floor. Earl Loomis was behind a closed door in a building that might or might not burn before morning. Danny Murdoch was in a vehicle 50 yards away, receiving stabilization from people who would not tell me where they were taking him, or what would happen when the countdown reached 0. And somewhere in the Oklahoma dark, the creature, injured, bleeding, untracked, was moving through the creek bed and the scrub brush and the empty county land, carrying inside its chest a device that the entire apparatus of federal containment had been willing to burn a building to recover. It was loose. Nobody was going to find it tonight. Maybe nobody was going to find it at all. The vehicle started. The driver pulled out of the hospital lot onto the state highway, and through the rear window I watched the silhouette of Braddock County Hospital grow small and then disappear behind a curve in the road. I'd walked those halls 10,000 times. I knew every supply closet, every breaker panel, every door that stuck. I was never going back. The man across from me was still waiting, recorder running, red light steady in the dark. I started talking.